In recent years, European politics has taken a more conservative stance on migration than what it used to take a decade ago. The most recent example can be the Netherlands, whose government collapsed over differences on an immigration bill. Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte resigned on Friday after his coalition partners refused to extend support to his immigration policies. The policy sought to restrict the flow of asylum seekers in the country. It proposed to limit the entrance of children of war refugees who are already in the Netherlands. It would also have made these families wait for at least 2 years before they can be united with their children. Rutte's decision to bring down the government instead of reaching a compromise with the coalition is indicative of how potent the issue has become. This is not only true for the Netherlands, but for entire Europe as well. All the countries here are facing an immigration crisis, with migrants from poor nations traveling on dinghy boats, risking their lives in hope of a better standard of living. This in turn has led to a housing crisis on top of inflation, which already soared owing to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Apart from this, right-wing parties have capitalized this issue by adding the angle of threat to national identity. The shift to migration-based politics became noticeable after the Syrian refugee crisis in 2015. Since then, several European nations like Italy, Germany and France have seen the rise of far-right political parties. Take the example of Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. She had made the issue of migration a key tenet of her campaign and has pushed for tougher EU action to fight illegal migration after coming to power. Another example can be of Marine Le Pen of France, who came dangerously close to defeating President Emmanuel Macron last year. She too had taken a strong anti-immigration stance and promised to drastically limit immigration. This change in the European politics has been influencing the political scenarios around the world. Just on the other day of collapse of Dutch government, former US President Donald Trump brought in the issue of immigration to augment his presidential campaign. He linked it with the recent riots in France. Trump said that unrest clearly shows the need to have a tough migration policy, as going soft could lead to a similar situation in the United States.
When I return to office, the travel ban is coming back even bigger than before and much stronger than before. We don't want people blowing up our shopping centers. We don't want people blowing up our cities, and we don't want people stealing our farms. So it's not going to happen. The United States will not be condemned to the same fate as is happening in France. And I told Macron this was going to happen when I first met him.
Being tough on immigration or not is subjective to one's own interpretation, but the alterations in Europe's state of affairs clearly suggests about what issues have come at the forefront in its politics. Let's try and understand how Europe's migration crisis is affecting other countries. Britta Petersen is a German journalist. He's joining us from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Thank you very much for joining us and welcome to this program. Let me start by asking you, what impact will this issue of migration have on Europe politics or on European politics if it is not handled effectively and on time?
Well, I mean, I think it is a more complex question than that. Obviously, the situation at the moment is that you have a new wave of refugees coming into Europe, partly, of course, from Ukraine, but partly also from other parts of the world, mainly from Northern Africa. But that is not the only problem. And the problem is that right-wing populist parties are trying to make people believe that this is the case. If you look at the unrest in France at the moment, it is very clear that many of those people who are in the streets at the moment in France are actually not refugees. Many of them are second or third generation immigrants from the former French colonies who have been living in France, who are French citizens, but who never felt that the promise that there could be French citizens with the same opportunities and chances in life, that they could have the same opportunities and chances in life as people who were of French origin. So we are seeing a very complex situation in different parts of Europe. If you go, for example, to other European countries such as Hungary, that has a populist right-wing government, but has almost no immigrants. These political parties, these right-wing populist parties, they are still able to make people believe that migration is a big problem for them. So if you look at the European legislation and the attempts to keep refugees out of Europe, it is very strongly driven by the agendas of right-wing populist parties, and very often they are quite detached from the real situation in their respective countries. So, and that poses a serious problem for all kinds of political parties in the democratic spectrum.
Right. Britta, let me ask you this. Not just Europe, but Africa is also facing this issue, especially North African countries like Libya and Tunisia. The governments have vowed to crack down on people who fund and even fund the migrant cells to Europe. But is that enough, or what is the alternative of dealing with this crisis once and for all?
Well, I guess there are actually no good solutions to this problem, and I also don't think that it's possible to solve this once and for all, because as long as you have poverty, widespread poverty in many of the former European colonies, but also in countries that have not been colonized, you will always have people who are willing to take that risk to, hire a small boat and try to make that journey across the ocean. And so far, there have been many different suggestions how to deal with this, and as you see, for Europe, it's a huge problem having these refugee boats, people drowning in the Mediterranean. There are heavy controversies about how to deal with this among the different political spectrums. And so far, nobody has been really happy with any of the suggested compromises. I mean, there is a lot of development cooperation that is trying to create jobs in African countries that contribute many of the refugees. But that is also a very difficult task, because it's not only a question of how much money you put into a country to create jobs. You also need to have political stability. You do not have political stability in many of the North African or East African countries. So these are all topics that are beyond the influence of European governments, of course.
All right, I've been talking to Britta Petersen, live from Addis Ababa. She's a German journalist based there. Britta, thank you very much for all your inputs and for talking to WION World is One today.
Thank you for having me.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.